Welcome to Outlier on Air. Today we are in the San Francisco area. We are actually right here in Palo Alto. We're with Peter Horan. Thank you so much for making time
My pleasure. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. So we had you on our audio podcast several months ago.
Yep.
And we actually took 2 episodes because it was such an interesting conversation.
And I talk so much.
Well, we love it because you have a perspective on Silicon Valley that few people have. You've been here through 5 basically evolutions of technology, from media to cell phones to gaming. I mean, you have such a great perspective, and now you're an investor.
Yes.
And you've also been the CEO to several high-profile companies, about.com, ask.com. There are many, which you can find on Outlier magazine. There's a huge bio, which I won't, I'll spare you that right now.
Spare your viewers that, more importantly.
No, in fact, you wrote the owner's manual. It's a POM, from what I understand.
Yep.
So just sitting and talking to you, as we've had breakfast this morning, and sitting and talking to you about technology, about media, about the trends that are going on, and about the trends that are going on right here in Silicon Valley is fascinating. And I think, Silicon Valley is kind of a bar that, especially in tech, that is set and everyone measures themselves against to some degree. Mm-hmm. So, we don't have as much funding as Silicon Valley, but da-da-da-da.
Yeah. So everyone wants to be the Silicon Beach, the Silicon Alley, the Silicon Canyon. You want to be a Silicon something.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course we want to dig into that and talk about that as well as some trends. But first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your career and the progression of it, if you wouldn't mind letting us know a little bit about it.
Well, it's funny. So we're sitting on a spot in downtown Palo Alto, which is significant because we're talking on the day when the iPhone 6 is launching, and we're actually in a building that's now like a hairdresser and a nail salon, but it was originally one of the first ad agencies in Silicon Valley, Regis McKenna, and they actually designed the first Apple logo, the rainbow logo, in this spot. So that's why it's significant to be here on this day. And the reason for mentioning it is that when all that happened 40 years ago, it was a very questionable career choice to get involved in technology. Matter of fact, somebody, head of a major agency who shall remain nameless because he should have been embarrassed by it, was recruiting me to handle what at the time was the Intel account and Sugar, which is a big, significant businesses. And he said, look, he goes, just get this business profitable and we'll get you off of this and get you into some real business. And I was like, wait, I thought this high tech was real business. He goes, no, I'll get you on California brandy and peaches. That's the good stuff.
So back then it was like experiment.
Oh yeah. It was all very sketchy. And so what you have to remember, so my career, such as it was, in the very earliest days, we were selling kit computers on the floor of the Second West Coast Computer Fair in plastic bags. Yeah. And whenever we did like focus groups and would ask people, well, are you interested in a personal computer? Are you interested in a cell phone? They say, absolutely not. Zero interest. We don't need that stuff. Right. And so if you ever said, oh yeah, I still have a focus group report that I wrote for the Commodore PET, the personal electronic translator, which is one of the very earliest computers. And the conclusion was, people didn't want personal computers. This will never go anywhere.
They couldn't imagine what it could do for them.
Right. And so, I think one of the so now that we've sort of become, I say, cliche of ourselves, right? And we got TV shows and Shark Tank, and everybody wants to be a startup guy. There's a risk of sort of losing, I think, some of the most important lessons, or learning the wrong lessons. Now it's like, well, if it's not $1 billion idea, it's not worth doing, and we've got to be able to model it. And in fact, in the earliest days, like I said, this was not a serious business. In fact, the only reason we succeeded was because nobody took us seriously. One of the stories that Microsoft used to tell around the campfires was that, well, my God, if IBM had any idea this was such a big business, they never ever would have worked with us. And it's like it was only possible to have the first PC because nobody believed in them.
Right. They were small and wasn't a threat.
Yeah. And Clay Christensen, when he talks about the innovator's dilemma, talks about disruptive technology. And most people think about that as meaning, oh, well, it's the whizziest, fastest, most expensive, coolest, newest technology. And in fact, in most cases, the most disruptive technology is cheap and durable and ubiquitous.
So what's an example of that?
Transistor radios.
Okay.
So when transistor radios came in, every American home had this big old piece of furniture that was the size of a refrigerator.
Yeah.
That was a great, and the parents would want to sit on the couch and listen to Fibber McGee and Molly or something. And the kids wanted to listen to rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't do that in the living room. They had to take this cheap-ass Japanese transistor radio and put it on the hood of the car and play it too loud, listening to Elvis Presley.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where that changed. Personal computers, when personal computers came in 30 years ago, there were the high priests of technology. They had mainframes, they had minis, they had great computers. They knew what they were doing. They're professionals. And people were buying these toys on credit cards and dragging them in. But what they're basically saying is, I am going to secede from the IT infrastructure. I don't want to. I'll enter this data by hand. I'll print stuff out, have to re-enter, but I want to control my own future. And because this thing is so cheap, even if it's not super powerful, even if it's a pain in the neck to use, I can do this myself. And so that's and the kind of political example would be an AK-47. well, no. If you think about the Vietnam War, right?
Okay.
We had a whole bunch of really great technology,
Right.
but a bunch of peasants with AK-47s won the war because it was ubiquitous, cheap, and it worked.
Yeah.
And so so right now it's like there's this trap of thinking, oh well, something that's going to change everything has got to be this sort of miraculous nuclear powered freon cool thing. And in a lot of cases, what's actually powerful is stuff, like I said, which is cheap and ubiquitous. Phones around the world, there's still a ton of feature phones.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody in India and Bangladesh has got mobile phones, and so they're actually not getting landlines anymore. They're just using their feature phones.
Right.
But it's worldwide. Something like WhatsApp. WhatsApp was worth $19 billion because they had hundreds and hundreds of millions of users for low-cost, ubiquitous technology. One of the things that I think about a lot is, there's a great quote from William Gibson that says, the future is here, but it's just not evenly distributed. And
that's a very good point.
Well, no, and I think the two best ideas on kind of understanding the future and sort of planning for it, I think, come from Gibson, that idea, and the other is Ray Kurzweil, who I think is like one of the smartest guys in technology. And Kurzweil documents that what we as human beings want is we want change to be linear. It's like, oh, well, here's how much change we had last year. We got a little bit more this year. We got a little bit more next year.
It's always up.
Yeah, it's always up. But it's sort of predictable, right? Because you see what happened last year. You kind of, and that's why most planning processes are all based on linear regression, right? Oh, well, we're going to be 10% bigger than we were last year. We're going to take our costs down by 5%. But you sort of assume that there's a linearity to everything. And what Kurzweil has documented is that technology-driven change is logarithmic. And there's like almost never a moment when the percentage of change lines up with the reality. Because like you spend, people for 10 years were saying, oh, when are we going to get local area networking? Oh no, it's the 10th annual year of the lab, this is never ever going to happen. Then all of a sudden it takes off and it rockets.
Why is that? I mean, that's the $1 billion question is why.
Well, in my mind, you got to put the two thoughts together. Because you got the one side, which is that sort of frustration of where on the one side, nothing's changed. It's this hasn't happened. When is mobile going to be a big deal? When are hybrid cars going to take off? And nothing happened. Then all of a sudden it just rockets, and you go, wow, where'd that come from? Because all of a sudden it's like we got all this change. And then, but I think you have to go back to the other idea, which is typically all the stuff that's going to be a big deal, it's here. It's been here. It's here for 5 or 10 years before. Right? So I started working on personal computers in 1977.
Okay.
IBM, it was either 80 or 81, IBM announced their personal computer. But it was probably still another 10 years after that before it really became a big deal. It's like, so for some of us, it was like, well, duh, this has been here for a long time.
But the critical mass just takes time.
Right. So to some extent, all this stuff, there did a thing on the Today Show yesterday about cell phones, and it's like for the iPhone. Well, I had my first cell phone in 1984 or 5, and it was one of the Motorola walkie-talkie phones.
Brick thing.
Yeah, the brick.
Yeah.
With the big old antenna.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so, and there was thousands of them, right? Not millions, but thousands. And it was like, well, is this ever going to be a big deal? But, it took a long time.
Right.
But so at one level, it's like, well, gee, why did that sneak up on anyone? Because it was there for a long time. It was in the market. People were using it, but it just didn't quite catch up. And I remember when the oddest thing was, and it was the Brits that did it first, but they would walk down the street talking on their cell phone. And it was like, really? That looks so strange. I can't imagine walking down the street talking on a cell phone.
He looks ridiculous talking to himself like
right,
that.
Right. He must be a crazy person. But so that's part of it, though, is that even as you kind of think about, so one of the things that I think about a lot is, I'll say, how do you, in a structured way, envision a different future for your business and yourself? Because, and one of the talks I give is, you're about to get hit by a meteor. Because everybody, the premise of like a great disaster movie is you're going about your life worrying about, are the kids late for school and is Bobby smoking dope and am I going to lose my job? But sort of all these mundane things. And then there's this like big meteor coming down from outer space that's going to really ruin your life. And that's actually the way the future is. Because, if you think about business planning, you worry about all sorts of mundane things. Oh, that guy that I compete with, I see him in the lobby of my customer's office all the time. He's going to steal his account from me.
Sure.
And I'm worried about this. And the change is that the expected only wounds you, it's the unexpected that kills you. And so it's all the stuff that you weren't worried about. So the mainframe and mini computer guys, Burroughs, Univac, Control Data, Honeywell, DEC, they worried about IBM. They worried about each other. They didn't worry about Microsoft.
Right, sure.
It was totally outside their frame of reference.
The cheap and ubiquitous sneaks in and then overtakes eventually.
Sure, but they had no way to think about, you worry about other taxi drivers. You don't worry about Uber or Lyft.
Right.
And that totally transforms the business. And so it's that, so part of the challenge of planning in an environment where change happens more and more, something like only 20% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 in 1955 are still there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the average tenure of company in the Fortune, you think, okay, but how do I get to the Fortune 500? Maybe I got it made. But they only last there about 10 or 15 years.
So you're saying that now is it over time that now change it becomes more rapid because technology is just more rapidly evolving and zigzagging? That's not the way it used to be. Yeah,
I think we're in a time when the barriers to entry to a lot of businesses are lower. Mm-hmm. Look at how Amazon has transformed retail
in a short amount of time.
Very short amount of time. But what they said is, okay, if we have relationships with consumers, we have credit cards, we have purchase data, we can do a payment system, we have at-scale logistics. And so, for me, like one of those kind of whack on the side of the head moments was I was sitting with a friend in New York, and he said, I realized I needed new swim goggles, and we're on the Upper West Side of New York. He said, and I realized it was easier to go on Amazon, use Amazon Prime, pay the extra $4 to have it delivered tomorrow, and just have swim goggles delivered to my house tomorrow, than it was to walk around looking for who's got my swim goggles.
Yeah, they've mastered the supply chain.
Yeah. But so with that, and originally people were like, oh, well, yeah, I might buy a book or maybe a CD from Amazon, but I'd certainly never buy swim goggles or a flat screen TV.
But it seems like when the time when it reaches critical mass is when it's easier to use than not to use. Do you agree with that?
Sure, absolutely. It's like, so I always say technology doesn't create new behaviors. Mm-hmm. What it does is it facilitates and accelerates behaviors people already have.
Sure.
So Facebook didn't make you want to show pictures of your grandchildren or tell your friends about your vacation. It just made it easier.
You already did that.
Right.
This just
right.
Things
right. So now you can, and what you want that sort of affirmation. You want people to say, "Oh, your kid is really cute," or you want them to say, "Wow, I wish I went on vacation with you."
Yeah.
And so it was sort of it lowered the barrier to getting that kind of affirmation.
Sure.
And so, I would say technology changes fast and people change slowly. So, the other way to understand, so go back to cell phones. Like I said, when people would argue with me, oh, I don't want cell phones. Okay. And we couldn't figure out, I'm asking the wrong question. And so we would then say, okay, well, tell me this. Have you ever been stuck in traffic and been late to a meeting? Oh yeah, hated that. Was that stressful? That's really stressful. Okay. And so then you say, well, maybe I should get off the freeway and go find a payphone. Yeah, but then it's like you're going to be late. You're going to be even later if you get off the freeway. Okay. And then what happened when you went to oh, yeah, those payphones, they were like dirty and they were in bad neighborhoods and maybe they didn't work and it was raining. Oh, okay. So tell me this. Suppose you could make a call from inside the car and say, I'm running 10 minutes late. Oh, that'd be great.
But they would have never connected that necessarily.
Right. So people can't envision what a new piece of technology is ever going to do for them. So as you think about kind of the opportunity, something is, okay, what goes on in people's daily lives? What's their frustration? What's their ambition? What's, fear and greed? What do they want? Do they want to make more money? Do they want to reduce pain and stress? Do they want to go on a date? Do they want to, get a new job? Whatever it is. It's like, that's real. And now it's like, you just say how they can accomplish that more easily with technology. Then you can figure out the potential.
Interesting. So you have several companies that you've invested in.
Sure.
Is this the line of thinking that helps you to decide which kinds of companies you're going to invest in?
Yeah.
And you consult with them as well. So
Sure.
what kind of advice are you giving them commonly across all of the startups that you see that's just common that our audience might identify with? Especially in and we're talking about trends, and sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but especially in, I know we can't predict, and you say up front, I'm not going to predict the future,
Sure.
but especially in trying to preempt what's upcoming.
Sure. Well, so one thing, so actually let me kind of speak to that and then come back
sure.
to this. One of the things I'm always looking for is how would our customers do this if we didn't exist? What's the, and going in concentric circles, is that, it's easy to say, oh, they'll go to our competitor. But it's like, all right, forget that. How else, so I was advising I was a chain of business newspapers, and I said, okay, let's just, for laughs, say, Zap, you don't exist. What would your readers do? How would they gather, what information do they come to you for, and how would they find it? We started going, oh, okay, they would do this, they do this, okay, great. And your advertisers are primarily folks that want to reach businesses. How would they reach those businesses if you didn't exist? And we started realizing, would that do, it went from them thinking about the business section of their local newspaper as their primary competitor, to everything from LinkedIn to all sorts of other businesses as being how these people would find information.
So does that help them to define just how important they really are to the industry? Is that kind of
at one level, it's humbling in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But on the other hand, in some ways, it's I think one of the challenges for businesses, they're trapped by their own self-concept. Over the last 10 years, a lot of value has been created in what used to be the back sections of newspapers. Mm. So if you think about ancient history, mid-90s. You're looking for a house. Well, you look in the classified section of a newspaper. Or you're looking what's playing at the movie theater. You look in the newspaper. You look in, you're trying to sell your car. You're trying to, all these things were sections of newspapers that made a ton of money. And as things like Monster.com, Edmunds, Fandango, Open Table all came on, newspapers said, oh, that's really not that good of a business. And that's not what we do. We write articles. We have pictures. We don't book reservations. We don't, do car listings. We don't. And so their self-concept was, oh, we're not in that business. And so they sort of, on the one hand, missed the threat that something like Craigslist brought in.
Right.
And they also missed the opportunity because they said, oh, that's not real business. Well, gee, I would argue that Monster is worth a lot more than most newspaper companies now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so that goes back to sort of one of the other things that I always like to talk about, which is, sort of let's not learn all the wrong lessons from the history of Silicon Valley, because to some extent, as I said at the very beginning, we didn't ever start this with the assurance that this was going to be a good career move, a big business, and everybody would become millionaires and billionaires. We started because it was fun and interesting. We thought we could change the world, but it always seemed like a dodgy career move.
Right.
And so now it's like, when businesses and business leaders think about the future, one of the things they got to do is not it's like they always want the future. The future is always number 8 on their list of top 5 priorities. Mm-hmm. They'll say, oh, mobile's going to be big, but I can't deal with it this year. And then suddenly mobile takes off, and it's like, wait, I'm all wrong foot. I don't have this stuff. I was like, well, now what am I going to do? You know, it's like, booking reservations and doing restaurant reviews. You know, doing restaurant reviews online like Yelp. Yeah, that's kind of good, but I got other things I got to worry about. Then suddenly Yelp is a huge business, and nobody's ever going to go back to the old way of doing something.
Absolutely.
And so to some extent, they've got to be willing to sort of, you know, be part of the future, even when it's not obvious how big an opportunity it is.
Do you think this is a really relevant subject in the news media? I mean, with the way that news media is progressing, they're having some struggles with the progression of technology and the way that users digest news.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, it's important. I mean, there's many different ways in which this technology-driven change has impacted the news business. I mean, one is, I'll say, source of authority. You know, I guess Yelp is on the edge of the news business, but once upon a time, you know, so one of my operating assumptions is there are 3 generations of media consumers: 55 plus, 30 to 55, sub 30. 55 plus is the audience for print magazines, the evening news. Not that they're not online, but they tend to like credentialed authority.
Okay.
It's like if somebody says, "Oh, that restaurant is good," it's like, well, what credentials do you have that enables you to tell me that restaurant is good or that movie is good? 30 to 55 is web-centric. Laptop is primary means of access. Google is source of authority. If I'm not sure, I'll Google it. I trust that Google will send me to the right place.
Okay.
Sub 30, smartphone intensive, they tend to value the opinions of real people. And so the conflict would be if, let's say, you know, the New York Times says, oh, this place is really good, and it gets 2.5 on Yelp. 2.5 on Yelp wins. I used to, one of my real good friends was the head of digital for the New York Times. And every Wednesday they publish a list of top books, top movies, top whatever. And one Wednesday I walked in, I put it down on his desk. I said, does it at all bother you that the New York Times has never said a single good word about anything that appears on any of these lists? It's like, you know, you savage, you know, your movie critic savages a movie on Wednesday, and Friday night opens at #1 in the country. It's like, you say Survivor is a terrible TV show, and it's the #1 show.
What did he say to that?
He said different audience, basically.
Yeah.
But it's that thing about, you know, so understanding that now with everybody acting as their own curator of content, publisher, sharer of content, the people are, it's like the sources of authority. I say people shop for sources of authority, and so particularly younger generation is more likely to value the opinions of people like them, of what's important and what's relevant.
So they don't necessarily go and type in NewYorkTimes.com. That's more of a baby boomer that's going to do that.
Yeah, probably, definitely.
So how does that change their approach?
Well,
with the
so
news sources?
the New York Times, which I think is a fabulous property run by great people, is effectively a glorious niche product. You know,
it's no longer.
Well,
really
no, this
relevant.
was, you know, I think most business books are terrible, but one of the best was Mike Porter's Competitive Strategy book from a long time ago, and he had probably the single best business chart ever. The conventional wisdom was always that there was a linear relationship between market share and profitability. Oh, if I just get bigger, I'll make more money.
Right.
A niche business, small market share, hugely profitable on a percentage basis. And you can be Walmart or Costco, you can be big and profitable as you grow. But in the middle, this is like valley of death. And a lot of businesses basically go out of business because they're trying to grow from being a really profitable, successful niche business to being a national or global chain. And that was the trap for, you know, something like the New York Times, which they came back from, which was, are they going to become a national media source? Or are they going to say, you know, we've got X number of millions of people that love us and will pay thousands of dollars a year for the pleasure of our information. And so, you know, as I interviewed the CEO of the Financial Times shortly, but their attitude is, look, we've got a valuable property, and people make important decisions based on that, and we're going to charge them a lot of money for it. And we'll never be 100 million readers, and that's okay.
And you support that? You feel like that's a good...
That is a viable. You got to get your costs in line with it.
Okay.
But that works for unique information it's like you can't do that for sports scores. It's like because everybody's got sports scores. Everybody's got everybody's got the news that Scotland is going to stay part of the UK. You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. But if you're the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Financial Times, there are people that are willing to pay for your take on the news. Like I said, more, not the headline, but the why, the how, the what next.
Yeah.
That's valuable. But not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
And so for everybody else, it does become more of a low-cost, broad distribution.
So what kind of advice do you have for those niche businesses that start out as a niche business with a great audience, but they want to scale? What's the warning? Is there a warning? Because it sounds to me like any niche business is going to run into kind of that.
Yeah.
issue.
Well,
How do they gauge if they should open up and try to be, the main player, or just stay in their niche?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that, and I'll use Starbucks as an example.
Okay, they're a good example.
Well, no, because sometimes it's because you can go like something's been around for 30, 40 years, you can sort of see an arc. And Starbucks started as a niche business. And then they started saying, okay, well, let's, and a lot of times the growth is like up, drop, and they started to grow and they said, oh, well, there's more people that care about good coffee than,
right.
It's like, and again, it's not obvious, right? You couldn't do a business case that said, oh, there's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity in selling $4 cups of coffee. It's because every gas station was selling coffee for 25 cents, and Dunkin' Donuts was fine.
They'd say you're crazy.
Right. But it's like, but what's interesting is what Starbucks figured out was they could tap into this sort of other experience that people kind of want to go hang out somewhere. They want to listen to music. They want to talk to their friends. They want to pamper themselves. They want to, and so but then it's like now there's a Starbucks on every other street corner. But there's sort of some theoretical limit of, okay, if we need that much distribution, we want all those places, we better have food, they got to keep, so what they've done is they've reinvented themselves every couple of years to sort of keep growing the business.
Yeah.
That's
kind of the secret, is reinvention.
Yeah, also the thing they've done is, for as much as they've sort of become, again, a caricature of themselves, they've got a core group of users who like them a lot and keep coming back and like being in Starbucks. Now, what's interesting is behind them, you've got these new artisan coffee, the blue bottles and the fills, that have figured out, well, we can do more expensive coffee that takes even longer, it's even more difficult, and people will line up for that too.
Well, now that Starbucks is mainstream, they need something more upper crust than that.
Right. Well, no, but that's pretty typical, right? Is that, you go from a niche, if you're successful, you go mainstream. So say Starbucks has actually gone through that valley of death in the bottom and come out on the other side where they're a big business. But that in turn creates an opportunity for the kind of niche, upscale, more artisan businesses that come in behind them.
Yeah.
And so, to some extent, it's so what do you do if you're running a small, successful business? It's sort of understanding that relationship with the consumer, and so how many people are there like the guys at Columbia that you can reach out to, or how can you start to broaden your product to appeal to a greater number of people? But I think one of especially in a venture environment, it's keeping your fundraising strategy in line with that opportunity. Because where a lot of businesses go sideways, they've got a really neat small business. They're making money, they have happy customers, everybody's feeling good. And they raise so much money, they start to drive their strategy off their cap table. They start to say, oh, gee, we raised this much money, so then we got to be a $500 million company to give a return to our shareholders. Oh, what's a $500 million company looks like? And so they basically drive strategy off of, the cap table and the investment, not off of what the natural shape of the business is.
Right, interesting. So tell me a little bit about the companies that you work with. Now you're consulting. You were a bi-coastal family for quite a long time, 10 years I think.
Yeah.
You have a very accomplished wife in her own right,
and
have done both coasts, and now you're back on the West Coast. And you're consulting. Tell me a little bit about the companies that you're consulting for and the types of things you're doing.
Well, I'm on 2 public boards. I'm on the board of LendingTree, the mortgage company, which has been fabulous. We rode out the 2008 mortgage crisis and reinvented the business. That was a great example of reinventing the business. And Vigil, which is a second screen TV app and entertainment platform. I'm on the board of Perch, which is a Utah company headquartered in Ogden. Used to start as top 10 reviews in Tech Media Network, and they're now a global business, about 100 million in revenue. Two very interesting mid-stage startups. 12-Fold Media, which does ad targeting based on the content on the page, not using cookies, which is a big thing now.
Right.
And Netted TV, which is a second screen, or sorry, an over-the-top TV network. Doing programming with top brands like People Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Saveur, Better Homes and Gardens, Popular Science, distributed to smart TVs and to tablets. And Social Wire, which is doing product ads on Facebook quite profitably, and that's just booming.
Wow, very exciting stuff. You're such an observant person, and with the with the experience that you have, it's fascinating to hear kind of you in the thick of what's going on here in Silicon Valley with the observations that you make, and I know that you blog about that.
Yeah, I do.
So
at HoranMediaTech.com.
HoranMediaTech.com, because there really are kind of endless thoughts that we can actually put into our own businesses as we try to reinvent, as we attempt to figure out what's upcoming and how we can change with that. So we'd love to meet you online there.
Super.
So thank you so much.